All right, we've got correspondents in Washington, D.C., in Dubai and in Islamabad. But first, let's start with Ali Hashim, who's in the Iranian capital of Tehran. So, Ali, first up, the Iranians making it very clear they do not trust the U.S. president.
Well, indeed, this is what they told us. And also now we are hearing from the same source that the naval blockade, ending the naval blockade, is a full condition for going to Islamabad. So without lifting the naval blockade, the Iranians are not going to Islamabad. This is what we are hearing from our Iranian sources. For now, we don't know even who might be going. It all depends who will be coming from the United States. If J.D. Vance is going to be heading this delegation, as we heard, then Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf will most probably be the head, the lead negotiator. If J.D. Vance is not, then Abbas Araghchi will be leading the Iranian delegation. But it all depends how things are going to be moved forward by the United States, and that's why the Iranians are saying the ball is in the American court. This is one. The second thing, in the past couple experiences the Iranians had, and that's why they're traumatized by negotiations in such a situation. In two situations before, there was escalation. That's why they are not feeling, they're actually being skeptical, and they are feeling that there is escalation coming. The third and most important thing, what kind of a deal is on the table? This is the big question. Given the fact there's not yet been any understanding for the scope of negotiations over the enrichment and over the highly enriched uranium. While there are messages being conveyed through the Pakistanis that the Americans and the Iranians both are flexible, both are ready to put their effort in bridging the gaps. But would that mean a deal is going to be announced in Pakistan, or there is an empty deal that will leave the possibility for negotiations for the future? In the past, we were talking about 45 to 60 days. Now there's been talk of even 6 months of negotiations to tell Iran will be able to make use of these deals by having the sanctions lifted. However, during those 6 months, it's possible that there'll be some of Iran's frozen assets unfreezed.
All right, from Tehran to Washington, D.C., Patty Culhane is there. And Patty said the Iranians calling out Donald Trump, saying that they think they're being deceived by the U.S. president's inconsistencies. Are we having any response from Washington?
No response yet, but I have to say it would be absolutely remarkable for the United States president to announce that his vice president is traveling halfway across the globe for negotiations, only to have no one there to negotiate with. In past administrations, no sort of announcement would have been made about negotiations if they weren't 100% confirmed that the other side would be across the table. We did get a very lengthy social media post from the president this morning. A couple of things. It's very clear that after sending just 48 hours ago a bunch of posts talking about U.S. basically getting everything it wanted from Iran, sending the signal that it was over, we are now seeing a very defensive president. He's very much focused on the Strait of Hormuz. At one point, he said the U.S. doesn't need the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the U.S. does need the strait to be open because its closure has skyrocketed gas prices in this country, affecting not just drivers, but the cost of consumer goods. He then said that they're, in essence, helping with the U.S. blockade, which is a little bit trickier to understand because the blockade was only supposed to be meant for ships leaving Iranian ports. The president said every other commercial ship and tanker could get through, but there are no ships getting through because the strait is closed, so they're not able to enforce the blockade for ships that aren't actually there.
All right, Patty, thanks for that. Patty Culhane there in Washington, D.C. Back to Tehran. Ali Hashim Hashem, we're just hearing that from our sources that Iran is making the end of a naval blockade a full condition for going to Islamabad. Is that what you're hearing there too?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what an informed source told Al Jazeera, that ending the naval blockade will mean Iran going to Islamabad. And the issue now is related more into who starts and who takes the first step. The Iranians aren't ready because the day when Abbas Araghchi tweeted saying that the strait is open or open within the Iranian supervision, the President of the United States said that the naval blockade will continue to be imposed. To them, this was a real breach for the ceasefire, and they are still dealing with this situation, whereas if they are going to go to Islamabad, this should be ended. And then things can get into the norms. Now, what we are hearing also is that there is a possibility that without an announcement from the United States, the blockade might be lifted this evening or tomorrow. This is the Iranian narrative. And let me just emphasize on something. We are in Iran, so what we are reporting here is the atmosphere in Iran and what we're hearing from Iranian sources. So this is our side of the story, and of course, Al Jazeera is presenting all the sides of the story. So what the Iranian sources are saying, they know that there might be a possibility that the Americans might lift the blockade without announcing that. Even that might be okay for the Iranian delegation to go to Islamabad.
All right, all very uncertain at the moment. Ali Hashem there in Tehran. So Patty, back in Washington, D.C., how much of a setback would this be for Donald Trump if these talks don't go ahead, if he is indeed looking to end this war?
It could potentially be a huge setback, especially if you look at what the markets are going to do when they open on Monday, if there aren't any talks. And we saw the stock market go up, gas prices come down on Friday, and that would potentially go very much in the other direction. That is going to be a point of contention for voters because polls show the vast majority don't approve of the job Donald Trump is doing, and they don't approve of his handling of the war in Iran. That disapproval, if it continues to grow, if things continue to stay expensive, if they get more expensive, then we're going to see more pressure on members of Congress. Let's not forget, the Constitution says only Congress can declare war. The president didn't consult Congress or allies before launching this war. Under the laws of the United States, a president can engage in military hostilities for 60 days. It's called the War Powers Resolution. Getting close to that 60-day mark, the law allows for a 30-day extension, but after that, presumably, he has to get congressional authorization. Now, modern presidents have just blown past that, specifically Barack Obama went on for months. That said, have already been votes in both the House and the Senate to invoke the War Powers Resolution Act. And the last time, just a few days ago, that it went before the House of Representatives, the vote totals were 213 yes to invoke the War Powers Resolution, 214 no. It's a one vote difference. And you can see if the public continues to feel the pain of this war, puts more pressure on Congress, it wouldn't take much to flip the House, a little bit more to flip the Senate, but the White House has to be aware that that is a possibility.
All right, Patty Culhane, Washington, D.C., thanks for that. Let's head to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, who's in Islamabad. A lot of uncertainty in the air, Kimberly, to say the least. But in the meantime, I understand there's furious security preparations underway in Islamabad, where you are.
Yeah, their preparations are still underway, even as we know that there is skepticism on the part of Iran about the genuine nature of these talks. And this is the delicate dance that the Pakistanis are playing, particularly here in Islamabad, in trying to orchestrate bringing these two parties together. We know the ceasefire expires on April 21st. And so that is the first goal that is trying to be achieved. That's why we know that the Iranian foreign minister and the Pakistani foreign minister earlier today on Sunday were, in fact, having a phone conversation where it was stressed that the need for dialogue was immediate, not just because of the ceasefire, but also because of the need to get the Strait back open and to address the nuclear issues, which are still outstanding. But at the bottom line is, I think that this fragility of bringing these two parties together is most exposed when you consider just the announcement of the U.S. delegation itself and who would be coming to the United States was messy. There was an initial announcement by the U.S. president that it would be Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner as Middle East envoys, only to then say that Vice President J.D. Vance would be leading up the delegation. And here's the reason for that. Very quickly, again, we know that Iran does not trust Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. They see both parties as being closely aligned with Israel and having those interests as being primary. And as a result, it is sort of expected here in Islamabad that the reason for the addition of J.D. Vance, despite the argument that there had been a problem with security, was the need to reassure Iran that there were genuine talks that were set and were underway. So very quickly, officials here saying, look, we're still setting up, credentials are underway. In fact, the security is now so tight into the so-called red zone, the diplomatic corridor or block and government offices block. This is literally the only entrance you can get in and out of now, because everything else has been locked down by more than 10,000 and an additional 10,000 police and military.
Yeah, lockdown in Islamabad. All right, Kimberly, thanks for that. Kimberly Harkett there in Pakistan. Well, clearly, the Strait of Hormuz remains a major sticking point between Iran and the United States. Iran closed the waterway again on Saturday and said it will remain that way until the US lifts its blockade of Iranian ports. After some movement in the Strait of Hormuz on Friday, shipping data showed that traffic has now come to a virtual standstill. This map shows the situation right now. The red dots and arrows are there, the oil tankers, oil and gas tankers, and those in green are commercial vessels like cargo ships. Ships once again keeping away from the main pinch point there, with many vessels stuck in the Gulf, hundreds and hundreds of them. Zain Basravi is live for us in Dubai. And Zain, just take us through once again the importance of the Strait to these negotiations that we could be seeing in Pakistan.
Well, it seems like a good time to remind viewers that the Strait of Hormuz was open before this war began. Before this war that the U.S. and Israel began, the Strait of Hormuz was not a factor. Now it seems like the most important factor in bringing an end to this conflict that was once again brought to the doorsteps of the Middle East, once again by the United States. So what we are seeing here is that the Strait of Hormuz is turning into a major flashpoint and a major pinch point to moving forward with trying to bring this ceasefire forward, trying to extend it and trying to turn it into an end to this conflict, to try to reach some kind of negotiation. The standstill you mentioned, that came with 3 vessels being fired on off the coast of Oman just about 24 hours ago, and that signaling an escalation that the Iranians are not just blockading, they are also actively policing vessels in the waterways around the Strait of Hormuz as well. So what we are seeing is the Iranian blockade in effect, heavy policing by them, in some cases firing on ships reportedly, and the U.S. blockade there as well. And this is a recipe for yet more escalation with these competing blockades to try to control the Strait of Hormuz. Now, what we know is that the 2 tankers today sailing under the flags of Botswana and Angola were turned around by the Iranians. They described it, according to Iranian news agencies, as an unauthorized transit through the strategic waterway. And as such, that remains the case. And as long as that remains the case, especially for the GCC, and really for the global economy as well, it remains a major security pitfall and a major economic pitfall. What the GCC wants to see is the Strait of Hormuz open. They want to see a return to normal normalcy, that gets their airspace normalized, that has flights returning to these important hubs in the region for travel, for tourism. But one thing that is really going to be very important for GCC leaders and people living here when they look at the talks that are going to be taking place in Pakistan is if the ceasefire is extended, if Wednesday comes and goes and there's a return to open conflict. And the worry is that they will start seeing those retaliatory attacks by Iran once again that became such an important part of their strategy during the war.
Zain, thanks for that. Zain Basravi in the UAE, in Dubai. Thank you. Okay, joining us here in the studio is Alexandru Hriștanu, who's a military analyst with expertise in maritime security. And just taking on Zain's point there, if people hadn't heard of the Strait of Hormuz before, people around the world, they certainly have now, haven't they?
Yeah.
Because the Strait, it was open before, it was running smoothly, and is now a major factor, perhaps the major factor, in getting this war ended.
Yes. So for sure, it's the major factor because Iran knows that this is their only fair and honest leverage they have against US. US cannot leave this war without opening the strait because this will basically leave the Gulf in a situation, in a disarray situation where commerce is basically cut off from the global supply, and nothing comes in, nothing comes out, and that's not an acceptable situation for US, as much as it's not an acceptable situation for the Gulf countries, and as much as it's not an acceptable situation for the world economy.
All right, so what do you think the situation is now, given what the Iranians are saying, that they think that they are being deceived by the US president's inconsistencies, which isn't surprising given the fact what happened the last time, the last two times that they were talking and it ended up in conflict, and also the fact that they are now saying that Iran is making the end of the naval blockade a full condition for going to Islamabad, the end of the US naval blockade. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think we're going to see talks in Islamabad?
I don't think that we will see talks in Islamabad because there's too much on the line here. They invested too much in this discussion. They had a high-level discussion for the first time in 47 years, and then a face-to-face discussion for the first time in 10 years. So I don't think this will go off. This will go away so easily. I think both parties are invested in this ceasefire and invested in finding a deal.
So will the US lift the